Hey guys, what's up? So this is my first video in my beginner series, and this first video is intended to sort of give you an anchor in how to get started with PvP. It's not so much going to be about the mechanics of PvP, but more just what you need to know in order to get started with the very basics. So in order to get started with PvP, you have a number of different options that you can use to actually engage in PvP. You can choose to host or to gank. You can choose to use some of the covenants like the Blue Sentinels or the Dark Moons, where you actually get summoned to help the home team, the host. The other options you have, you can do arena fights, and arena fights can be 1v1s or 2v2s or 3v3s. You can also do red sign duels, where you drop your red sign and somebody summons you, or somebody else drops their red sign and you summon them. And that can either be done via password with somebody you know, or without a password, in which case anybody can pick up the sign and summon you, or you can summon anyone else. And of course, last of all, you can engage in invasions. Well, where should you start? And this is actually a pretty tough topic, and I think if you want to invade, I think you should still start with duels. And of course, if you want to duel, then there's no need to invade. But for an invader, you need to be kind of a jack of all trades. And you're going to get mightily frustrated if you start with invasions, because you're going to be up against multiple opponents very frequently. The invasion mechanic in this game works such that the more phantoms a host has in his or her world, the more likely they are to be invaded. So the majority of your invasions, the vast majority, will be against multiple opponents. So I wouldn't start there. If it were me, I would advise either maybe start with hosting and ganking, or I would start with red sign duels. Now, if you start with ganking, that's fine, just to get your feet wet, but I wouldn't stick with it for very long, because you're not going to learn a lot. And in fact, it's actually worse than that. I think you're going to learn a lot of bad habits, because having those teammates is going to provide benefits. You may not even be aware that you're getting them. You'll learn to rely on them. And then when it's time to fight somebody 1v1, you're going to be in bad shape. You're really not going to be able to do it. So again, if you want to start by hosting or ganking, I think that's fine. I would just emphasize trying to get away from that as soon as possible. So next up is, what kind of build should you start with? How do you make a build for PvP? And the first thing I would say is the build really isn't terribly important as you're learning. So if you already have a ready-made character and you want to use that to start, I think that's totally fine. Now, that build may put you at a competitive disadvantage, so in the long run you may not want to stick with that build, but for purposes of learning, the build isn't terribly important as long as it's a melee build. I wouldn't try to start with a pyromancer or a caster of any kind. I would definitely try to start with a melee build, though of course do what you want. If what you want to be is a caster, then by all means start with that, but there won't be as many resources for you, and these videos probably won't be able to help you very much. However, while the kind of build that you have doesn't matter so much, the soul level of the build absolutely matters, and it matters a lot. The higher the soul level you go, especially as you approach meta, which is between soul level 120 and 133, the quality of your opponents will improve as you go higher, and the amount of damage that you do to each other will go up, and your survivability is greatly impacted. So fights will tend to be over much more quickly. If you get caught in the blender, which is essentially where you get put in stun lock by a number of opponents in PvP, the fights will end very quickly, and so you won't have as much of an opportunity to learn, and it can be quite discouraging. So if you want to make a new build for PvP, then I recommend going to about soul level 55, soul level 60 with +6 weapons. That to me is a perfect balance. It's a great place to get started with PvP. If the only build you have right now is soul level 125, I really wouldn't advise starting there, though you can if you want, especially if what you're going to do is duels. I think that's more okay. If what you want to do is invasions, I would really stay away from that soul level, at least to start, because again, you're just going to find a lot of frustration. Incidentally, not only as the damage goes up, but the strength of your competition goes up as you get closer to meta. I find that relationship to be especially strong on PS4, a little less so on PC. I tend to find players of all caliber at all soul levels. There's still a relationship, but it's just not as strong as it is on PS4. If you want to think about what kind of build you should make, I mean, there's a number of different options. You can make dark builds, you can make dex builds, you can make strength builds. I personally would start with a quality build or a dex build. And a quality build just means sort of equal amounts of strength and dex. It doesn't have to be perfectly equal, but it means you're leveling both those up. Quality build means your damage stats are strength and dex, whereas a dex build obviously is just going to be dex. I would probably stay away from strength builds, at least to start, only because a lot of the strength weapons tend to be slower and in my view require a bit more skill to be able to use efficiently. But again, if what you really want to do is swing around a big club, then by all means go with a strength build and start there. It just may be a bit more difficult for you getting started, but if you're interested, that's way more important than what I think about what weapons suit you best. The other thing I like about quality builds and I like about dex builds is they allow you to try out a large number of different types of weapons, and that's really important too. We'll talk more about weapons here in a moment, but I would advise you to start with a build that gives you the most flexibility so you can try out a number of these weapons, not only to see what you like, but also because you need to be a jack of all trades, at least when you start. You need to understand how to use a lot of different weapon types, and using different weapon types will also teach you a lot about how to counter those weapon types when you encounter them in PvP. Before I go into the weapons that I might recommend you start with, or the weapon classes, I want to take a moment and talk about the weapons that I would avoid personally. So I would avoid Crucifix of the Mad King, the Farron Greatsword, the Ring Knight paired Greatswords, and Split Leaf. These are all fine weapons. Use these weapons if you want, but I think these weapons can also teach you some bad habits when you're first starting. So again, if that's really what you want to play, by all means go for it. But if you're looking for some recommendations, I would stay away from those weapons, at least to start with. In terms of weapons I would use, I don't think about so much specific weapons as I think in terms of weapon classes. So there's certain weapon classes that I think are really valuable, either because they teach you a lot when you use them, or because they're very useful in PvP, especially in invasions. When you invade, you'll often find that you need to switch from one weapon type to another, just because different weapons are suited for different circumstances. Now, we're not going to get into what those circumstances are just yet. We'll cover that in future videos. For now, I would focus on these four weapon classes: straight swords, curved swords, great swords, and spears. Again, we'll talk more about why I think that in later videos, but as long as you feel comfortable with those weapon classes, I think that's a great start. And obviously there's many other weapon classes that we can look at: daggers, hammers, great hammers, ultra great swords, but for now I would just sort of stick with those. In the description of the video, and maybe in some comments as well, I'm going to leave some tips, maybe some templates for some starting builds that you can use. There's websites like Soulsplanner is probably the most common, that let you actually create builds. And not only can you create the builds in these tools, but you can see how your defenses will be, what kind of armor you can wear without fat rolling, how much damage your weapons are going to do at different upgrade levels. And this is really useful when you're trying out new ideas, so you don't actually have to go to the point of actually creating the build only to realize maybe it's not going to work for you. So I'll include some build templates, both maybe for like quality builds and for dex builds. I would stay away from things like dark builds, and then of course strength builds, as I mentioned earlier, I would stay away from those too. Next up, I would say you want to make an effort to get plugged into the community as you're learning. There's a lot of great resources out there. There's a lot of great players out there, people that will help answer questions, people that will duel with you. And the way that you can meet those people, there's a variety of approaches. You can join Discords. There's a number of PvP-oriented Discords out there. You can join Twitch streams, and you can watch YouTube videos and leave comments and maybe try to find like-minded players. I think Twitch streams are actually probably one of the greatest ways to meet players, especially when you're first getting started. You'll find that the Twitch community is always really helpful. There's people that stream their duels, there's people that stream their invasions, and you'll learn a lot just by watching these players and seeing what they do and what's different from what you would do. Also, have the right attitude. When you start, you're going to lose a lot. There's just no two ways about it, and that's okay. It's okay to lose. I sometimes fight really good players, and I know going in that most likely I'm going to lose against them, and I'm okay with that because I treat it as a learning experience, and so too should you when you're first starting out. Accept that you're just going to lose a lot, you're going to get better, and then your winning percentage will start to go up, but don't get too frustrated by your losses to start with. Okay guys, my last tip is record your own fights, and folks that have been a friend of the channel for a while will no doubt have heard me make this point before, but I keep harping on it because it's so important. And I know it sounds like, what am I really going to learn from watching my own fights? I already experienced it myself, of what value is it to watch it again, but I'm telling you, I know because I've lived this so many times, you will see things when you watch back your own fights that you did not see at the time. There are things that will be obvious in retrospect from watching your replays, things that you did not see at the time, and you'll ask yourself, how did I miss that? So make sure that you take the time to do that. You don't have to watch all your fights or anything like that. Or if you lose in a really stupid way, there may not be any value in watching that. But if you fight a good opponent, or you feel like the opponent's similar in caliber to you, and maybe there were just a few decisions that had they gone a different way, you could have won, I would definitely give some thought to watching those and see what you learn, and then try to incorporate those lessons into your next video. My next video is going to be about spacing, and spacing is truly the foundation of PvP in this game. Dark Souls 3 PvP can be deep in certain ways, but spacing is undoubtedly the primary skill that you need to develop to be skilled at PvP. And if you don't know what spacing is, that's okay. We're going to talk about that in my next video. I do hope you guys stick around for that. I hope you guys find value in these videos. And if there's a topic you'd like to see me cover, please do let me know, and I'll be happy to consider including it. Please do stay tuned, guys, and take care of yourselves.